You hear that? Wait for it, wait for it. No, echo's mostly gone.
Ow! I'm studying! I promise!
This video is going to be a little different than my usual, but it's going to be about sound as opposed to programming, which is a little odd for this channel. But hey, it makes a difference for game programming, because pretty much every game has sound. You might have to record it yourself. You might have voiceover recordings that you have to manage. And if you're like me, then you don't have a big sound booth because you're stuck in an apartment in the middle of a pandemic, and well, now you have to work with something. So I have an apartment with a room in it, and it looks like this from my side of the camera, which kind of helps hopefully because, well, now the echo's mostly gone. You can't kill it completely, and we can't isolate from everything else, which is all the stuff I'm going to talk about in this particular video, and a little bit of the science about why this stuff works. So something else worth noting is I'll be doing another video probably next week on how to set up microphone recording, kind of work with what you have. You don't have to have a super expensive microphones to get pretty good quality sound overall. And it's like a Twitch feed or some other gaming feed that you're working on for streaming. You can pretty much do that pretty easily. I just get some free tools off the line, and you can work with that and get some pretty good sound overall. So something to note with this video is that I'm using a fairly sensitive mic. Most people are probably going to use some kind of dynamic mic. I'm using a condenser mic because it's going to pick up a little more of the room noise that I want you to hear actually along the way. I'm even going to cut out some of the music I would normally throw in this little section so you can kind of get an idea of what's going on. So this particular video is going to be looking at dampening, not isolation. There's a big difference between that. So if you're in an apartment, you're not going to be able to isolate the sound from your neighbors because you don't have the ability to redesign the whole room, put padding between walls, and so on. Also, you could cover the walls every square inch with multiple layers of sound isolation material, but that's going to be a few $1,000s at least, and your manager for the building may not approve it. So be careful with that particular idea. So the option like I have is to dampen the room and just try to kill as much echo as I can, and hopefully pick the times when my neighbors are being quiet enough or there's not enough sound coming from the outside to actually get some clear audio along the way. So dampening is just cleaning up the actual room itself, trying to remove some of the echo and make it a little more pleasant to listen to. Isolation is actually preventing any sound from going in or out of the room so that you can get 100% just the sound that's in the room itself. And that's the biggest difference. If you want isolation, don't buy cheap sound panels. You're going to have to spend expensive amount of money on those, and they're not going to be easy to find. You'll have to go to a specialty store, not something like an online website. So I took down the sound paneling to give you an idea of how horrible it sounds in this room without it. Enjoy. That last section, I had the mic a little farther away from me. I had it cranked up a bit so you can hear all the room noise. I'm going to talk more to a normal volume. Hopefully the echo goes away now. That's kind of how sound works. And sound has this range between 20 hertz all the way up to 20 kilohertz. That's kind of what we hear overall. As you get older, that actual range shrinks down, and someone my age probably hears 18,000 hertz at the top end. And maybe the lower end is kind of starting to kind of move up a bit. Also, individuals that have kind of damaged eardrums will have a change in that as well. So as you get older, that actual audio range changes. What's happening is that sound actually works as a compression wave, which means that it's changing from like a whole bunch of air squishing together and then expanding back out again. And that change is a wave pattern, which is what we hear in our eardrums because it converts it for us. Just like a speaker actually sends out sound by vibrating a membrane, and also microphones pick it up by doing the same thing in reverse. Now that the chunk is gone, I can kind of continue on along the way. And so compression waves have an energy to them, just like an amplitude of a waveform does. Because it's air kind of moving, vibrating back and forth, that energy is how fast it's moving along and how much we could actually remove it by putting in some kind of dampening materials, kind of absorb a lot of that energy. So it's bouncing off of a wall, there's very little absorption of that energy. It's just which is why we get an echo off of it. If it's going between two walls, they can bounce back and forth over and over and over again. That's how you get like the Grand Canyon echo, because it's bouncing off and it's a long delay between each wave, and it's get a nice long echo and it sounds great. In a small room, it doesn't sound so great. So the sound panels are kind of deadening that particular reflection and absorbing as much energy as possible. So foam kind of works in that way because it's soft material. It has little holes that the sound can kind of work their way in and kind of bounce around inside the foam, and it can kind of absorb it that way because it's actually taking energy out of the actual waveform itself. That's kind of how they work overall. You have different foam like this one. It does the same thing all over again. It's just a different way of doing it because it has a shape that's kind of designed to absorb certain waveforms more than others. In this case, it's designed to pick up more of the bass end notes. So instead of using a foam to absorb the material, you can actually do other things as well. You can duct it away. If you're I've seen a Navy ship that has tubes that go from one room to another, and you speak through one of it, and it comes out the other end. You can hear it just fine. That's kind of trapping it and actually ducting it off to another location. You can do that if you have enough space. I don't have that much space. Or you can try to scatter that particular waveform. So if you have sound, it kind of expands outward over space. The energy doesn't change, may reduce a little bit, but it's being spread out over a larger area. So all the energy is here. Now as it expands out, that same energy is now spread out over a larger surface. So it actually ends up being reduced over time and distance as well. So you can actually do something like a hard panel that has a lot of different angles on it in order to redirect the sound in lots of different areas. So you end up scattering this sound over a larger area. Overall, reduce the sound as well. So less echo because it's not enough power in one particular spot in order to actually maintain an echo. The main goal of my dampening project is to keep it very inexpensive and cover as much surface area in order to reduce the echo down to something more pleasant. If I were to remove all of the echo, it actually becomes very dry and actually a little bit unpleasant to listen to overall. That's why in sound studios they add echo back into the process after all the recording has taken place. So in this case, I tried to keep the overall cost down. I actually spent a little bit more than I intended to. It was roughly equivalent of $150 in order to do this project. That's mostly because I went a little overboard on some extra things, like some of the corner reflectors that I have up there. And also I put fabric behind all of the actual panels to make them removable, along with some foam core. On the side here, I'm going to have some images kind of moving along the whole project, and you can kind of see what I did. So the idea is to cover most of the area. I can't cover all of it because I don't want to, and also it just becomes unrealistically expensive. I also went with 1-inch foam as opposed to 2 or thicker foam like most people might use, where it's easily available on online sites. I went with the 1-inch because it's cheaper. I'm also not covering every inch of the wall, so there's no point of trying to dampen everything because the walls themselves are reflecting almost perfectly where the foam is not, so it doesn't matter. It's just overkill at that point. And I can actually cover more area with the same amount of money by just getting the thinner foam. The other thing that I did is I put everything on a fabric backing that's not permanently mounted on the wall. What that does is the fabric allows it to sit outside the wall a little bit and actually let the foam itself vibrate back and forth as well to dampen more sound. So I actually get more effect out of it by just having it hanging there as opposed to having it actually physically attached and permanently mounted to the wall. Things you can do, and I've heard recommendations for, is hanging poodle noodles off the ceiling with a string. Or if you have like the egg crates that have a little cardboard with a little wave pattern in it, you get eggs in like maybe 18 or 3 dozen type size. You guys can take those and just hang them next to a wall. As long as it's not physically mounted, it scatters, and it also absorbs because the whole thing vibrates a little bit, deadens sound. Very cheap, and you can get those all over the place by just buying food. So you don't have to go even as much as I spent. So I used that theory, hung the particular objects on foam core, and mostly fabric on the backing. The foam core is there to keep it overall straight and actually pushed away from the wall a little bit. I also put a little hole at the top, and I can put some nails in the corners, so actually hang it from the wall and pull them down whenever I want it. Because, well, if I have too much, it's actually kind of unpleasant in this room to sit here all day because it's a little too non-echoey. There's not enough sound, so it becomes a little annoying and kind of gets a little depressing overall. So I can take them back down, get my echo back, so it's a little more enjoyable to sit in here. So working through this process, I kind of learned a few things along the way. First off, the fabric bracketing actually worked really well. It made it easy to work with. Just had to turn the particular pattern that I had for the foam upside down. A nice easy surface to work with. I can keep things nice and tight by just kind of working my way slowly across the foam and just kind of adhere the particular pieces of fabric on the back of it. But I also found that the usual method of using a spray adhesive didn't work very well. Stuff is actually not really designed for this type of thing. Yeah, it will work, but it's not permanent in any way, and I found that even the extra heavy duty stuff really didn't stick very well. So I don't recommend it at all. It has only one benefit of being quickly adhered and then being able to move it off to the side within a few minutes. But over a couple of days, I found that some of the corners started peeling away, which meant the whole panel started pulling away along the way. So what I've done is I actually ended up getting a different product that I had initially planned to use, which is effectively liquid nails if you want to look at the hardware store. It's just a glue that comes in a long tube, kind of like caulking almost, but it's just a glue that actually will work. But if you do that, make sure you get ones that work on foams and fabric and various other materials that you're using. Otherwise, you can easily have one that will damage the foam, not stick to it in the long run. So it's pretty cheap. It's actually cheaper than the spray adhesive. Doesn't go as far per tube, but this actually works out better. It's much more permanent. I used it for the fabric and putting back panels back up after they had started to pull away a little bit. Ends up being a pretty good combination. It also works really well for attaching the foam core to the fabric and not have to worry about it coming apart from the lightweight panel that I have. Still has some that spray adhesive probably wouldn't have held for very long. I mentioned these corner pieces. What I've done is I've put them in the corners and along the edges between the roof and some of the walls in order to dampen a lot of the bass notes that kind of amplify in the room. So bass notes have a nice long waveform, which means they can bounce between walls pretty easily, and they kind of add and stack on top of each other in the room. So one way to fix that is to put the little corners in where they tend to amplify and focus themselves in a particular direction. I mentioned before, if you stand in a corner, you hear a lot more bass than you normally would in the middle of the room. That's kind of what they're trying to absorb and kill off for the most part. So those pieces are put up, and I used some actual just hook and pile fasteners or Velcro for the United States. And those particular pieces kind of just stick up there. I can pull them out whenever I feel like if they become annoying. So there's two more walls that are usually ignored. There's one up there and there's one down there. They act just like the wall does, and they bounce sound back and forth between the floor and ceiling. And well, all that paneling on the side is not going to make a difference if there's wood down there and a hard surface up there. So something you can do is just throw a big blanket on the ground, like a winter blanket. Even if you just have a large bed in the room, a lot of that will actually get dampened by the big soft surfaces instead of having actual hard surface on the ground. If you have carpet, that's actually a huge advantage in a room where you are doing any kind of recording at all, because it's automatic 100% coverage of the surface. Done. So an alternate to putting up sound panels in a large room, you can actually do something very simple. You can take a couple poles and hang a string between them and then put a whole bunch of heavy blankets along the string, and now you have a sound barrier to isolate one section of a room for another. When I was an audio tech way back when in college, I had a humongous block of foam. It was yay tall and about this thick, and we could actually just isolate one section of a studio from another. Well, is kind of expensive for the most part. You might have to blow your whole budget on one block of foam. So we already have blankets on hand. It actually works pretty well overall, and you can isolate one section of a room from another. So hopefully through all this talking to the head rambling, you learned a little bit about how sound works and how you can dampen it and kind of optimize those things you have on hand, small dollar purchases, and kind of move them around a little bit. I've also learned that I have a couple tweaks I have to do in order to get rid of some of these weird bassy echoes, just moving a panel from one spot to another a little bit. It should kind of clear those type of things up. So with those tricks, hopefully you can kind of set up your own little studio, kind of work with what you have on hand. There's probably free blankets and so on, and set up your own little sound studio. We have a movie cave that you have, and you can do it pretty cheap. If you have any other ideas that I've not mentioned along the way, just go ahead and leave them in the comments below, and have a good day.
Ow! I'm studying! I promise!
So we'll kind of go over how to do that type of thing, and how to ramble and ramble and ramble and some more. Various things, and I'm rambling again. I have no idea what I'm saying, because I want you to hear what's actually there. Hi, how you doing? Yeah, that's fine. What's up? I have a room in an apartment, and I have to isolate it from the air conditioner.